prom came around. When our senior prom came around, Tammy needled a girl in her class to ask Danny to the prom. She was chubby and had so much metal in her mouth, I wondered if she could pick up radio channels. Danny came to me one afternoon and said a sophomore had asked him to the prom, but he didn't have anything to wear. I don't think he realized you rented a tuxedo, not owned one. We were standing by the lockers and Jimmy was next to me. He blurted out, "How would you get there, by bus?" As much as Jimmy wanted to rib Danny, Danny was a new guy. He had confidence, and getting rattled by the likes of Jimmy took more than simple put-downs. He had grown several inches over the previous 2 years, and we didn't tower over him anymore. He was still rail thin, and with his red hair teased out into an afro, he sort of looked like a light bulb. I grabbed his jaw and shook it with pride. He can double date with Tammy and me. "Bullshit, we're all supposed to go together," Jimmy sneered at Danny. "You know, Jimmy, you're an ass and I sort of want to have a good time. I think we'll substitute you with Danny." I was serious. Jimmy fired back, "You take that dweeb and no one else is going with you." "Really? You think so?" Jimmy stood there wearing his Letterman's jacket like a beacon, full of himself. I saw Tommy coming up the hall. "Hey, Tommy." "Yeah." "Hey, if Jimmy can't go with us, can we take Danny instead?" Tommy looked at Danny. "He got a date?" I smiled. "He sure does." "Yeah, why not?" Jimmy countered, "Fuck you, Steve." I was friends with Jimmy a long time, and never in all those years did I threaten him. I think because of that he felt he was on the same playing field as me. That day I warned him, "Watch your mouth." Jimmy and I had a falling out. It would be several months before we knew our friendship. I think it killed him that guys were willing to follow me over him. He tried for a few months to foment resentment, but it all backfired. One day he came up beside me on the baseball field and apologized. I said, "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to Danny." "Gee, Steve, you make this more difficult than it should be." I smiled. Back to the prom. I told Tommy and Greg that this was Danny's moment and to knock off the teasing. Surprisingly, if you pulled Tommy away from Jimmy, he was pretty good. Greg was more my friend than Tommy and Jimmy, and because he had come to accept Danny after he started riding to school with me. Not that he was overly nice to him, but he didn't go out of his way to mess with him. I was glad I went with Danny to get his tux. When we got to the shop, Danny immediately picked out a purple color. I protested, "No way in hell are you getting a purple tux. This is a big event, not a costume party." "I like it, though." "Danny, look at you. You have red hair. You would have looked like the Joker in Batman. What color do you suggest?" "Black, just like mine." Then I thought about it, all of us going to wear black, and with his build, Danny would look the worst in his. I take that back. There in front of us was a tailed white tuxedo. I'd take this one here and get the cane and top hat too. He looked great and he knew it. That night was special for Tammy and me, but it was magical for Danny. He never wore a tuxedo before, he was never in a limousine, and I knew he never tasted champagne. In fact, he tasted it a little too much. Champagne and I had some explaining to do to my parents when Danny's mom called that night when I got him home. Still, in his 18 years, that had to be the biggest moment in his life. That spring, I had to choose from several colleges that asked of my services as an athlete. I grew to 6'5", and I was being coveted for football, but the truth was I wanted to play baseball. Baseball was my first love and remained the best times I ever had in sports. I had 16 offers to major universities to play on the gridiron, but only 2 Division II schools offered me baseball scholarships. It was looking like I had no choice until Arizona came calling. One of the finest baseball programs in the country, the only Division I school to even show any interest, showed up at my door. They had a letter of intent and I signed it. What luck! Turns out luck had nothing to do with it. I learned a few years later that Danny had sent a bunch of reels of my baseball highlights and caught the attention of one of the assistant coaches. Danny was always looking out for me. Playing at Arizona would put me close to home, and in some ways that was probably for the best. Danny was enrolling in the local community college, and he could come with my parents to my home games only an hour away. That summer, all my friends knew we were going our separate ways. Greg was going to an NAIA school to play football. Tommy had Boise Street to walk on to the baseball team. Jimmy was staying home and playing baseball at the community college. We filled every day with summer fun, spending most of the time down at the rocks working up the courage to jump off the cliffs. There were warning signs that jumping was dangerous, but we watched Scott Parker and his friends do it all the time. The rocks overlooked the river, and as long as you didn't swim out too far and go over the second set of falls, you were fine jumping in. It was deep under the rocks. None of us had the courage. Danny kept saying, "I'll be the first." But we knew he was as petrified of the 50 feet as we were. I remember it like it was yesterday. We had a 6-pack of beer between the 5 of us, and we had run out. I had another 6 in the car and went back over the ridge to get them. I was gone for 2 minutes when Greg came chugging over the ridge and told me Tommy and Jimmy pushed Danny in. I dropped the beers and ran as fast as I could to the edge of the rocks. "What the fuck did you guys do?" Over the side, I could see Danny struggling to make it to shore, edging closer to the falls. Danny could barely swim. "Oh, come on, Steve." He was standing at the edge telling us he was going to jump in. All we did was help him. Danny wasn't screaming, but I knew he was trying as hard as he could to make it to shore, and failing. I tossed my t-shirt off, and without an ounce of fear that ran through my body so many times looking over that cliff, I jumped. When I hit water, I was moving so fast I hit with a thump. Surfacing, I could see Danny was at the fall's edge. He had somehow braced himself against 2 rocks, and the water was rushing up over his back and trying to push him along over the fall. I swam to the shore and skirted the bowl of water until I was standing where the water met the earth, 4 feet at most from Danny. The rush of water was deafening, but we were screaming so loud we could hear each other. I got on my knees and reached out as far as I could. "Take my hand, Danny." He was afraid. "I can't." "Yes, you can. Take my hand." He reached out and our hands met. I grabbed his wet, slippery hand and in one motion jerked him towards me so I could grab him at the elbow. His feet lost their position on the rock and he was dislodged from his security, but I grabbed with both hands and yanked him as hard as I have ever pulled something. In one motion I ran past the rapids and over to the shore. I saw total relief on his face. "Thank you for coming." "What were you thinking?" We sat there against the wall of the rock and peering over the fall. "Nothing. I don't think I was really going to jump. I just wanted to show those guys up. When they pushed me, I sort of didn't have a choice. Assholes." "It's okay," he smiled. "I did it." We stood to walk back and he looked at me. "Besides, I knew you would have my back." Just as the words came out of his mouth, his foot slipped out from underneath him, and he tumbled back into the falls and went over. I couldn't believe how fast he was gone. I started climbing down the rocks on the side of the falls. Some 75 feet below, I could see Danny floating lifeless in a shallow pool of water. When I got down to my friend, he was gone. Danny was dead. I cried, and I never cried harder in my life. I don't know if there is karma in life or not. Maybe there is. We buried Danny, and I never hung out with Tommy or Jimmy again. Turns out Tommy never made it to Boise Street. Instead, he worked at his father's gas station. I'm sure he'll get it someday and he'll do just fine. Jimmy went to the local college, but dropped out when he got a girl pregnant. He married her, and I hear he has found God. Good for him. He has struggled through the years, in and out of odd jobs. He didn't stay in very good shape, and the last time I saw him, he looked pretty fat and very bald. As for me, after college, I hovered around the minor leagues for 5 years, even made it to the shows for one glorious month, as the Yankees were in a pennant race. I have a ring to prove it. My official stat line reads 1 for 4, 1 home run, 3 RBIs, and 2 putouts. My claim to fame was my home run secured the division title. Unfortunately, I tore an ACL in the game and would never return to the majors. I teach high school now, and my wife and I recently had a son. We named him Danny. If you're looking for a community of like-minded individuals who can offer support, tools, and advice about how you can start your own adventures in writing, be prepared to have the cauldron of your imagination stirred. I started Eat Sleep Write for one purpose: to do everything I can to get your voice heard about your writing, as well as get more eyes on your books. My goal is to help you achieve the success that you so richly deserve.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Eat Sleep Write podcast, located at eatsleepwrite.net. Please send any questions, comments or suggestions to comments@eatsleepright.net. Please consider a donation to support the Eat Sleep Right podcast. Donations can be sent to our PayPal address at donations@eatsleepright.net. Once in a lifetime, the theme music for the Eat Sleep Right podcast, courtesy of Stephen Paul, all rights reserved, used by permission. Please join us again for the next edition of the Eat Sleep Right podcast.